All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to Marine Science Day. This is a very cool event. We're so appreciative that you are here, and no one that is putting this event on is actually in the room because they're all out there working. But I just wanted to say that it takes about 50 volunteers to pull off this event and over 200 exhibitors. So while you're walking around and you're seeing all the cool stuff, you might just throw in a thank you once in a while because they are really here and excited to show off the things that they're doing. My name is Cinnamon Moffat. I'm the research program manager here, and I will host this event with you all today. This is a hybrid event, which means we have folks online and folks in the room. For folks online, we do have your cameras, mics, and screen shares disabled, but there's a volunteer in the room. Roseanne, hi Roseanne. She is going to be monitoring the chat box. So if you have any technical issues, you can't hear us, or one of us lowers the mic like this, and you can't hear us that way, just let us know, and Roseanne will help us fix any of those technical issues. She will also read out any questions you put into the chat box for today's speakers. For you in the room, in order to ask a question when we open up question and answer, you will need a mic as well so that folks online can hear. That means you just need to raise your hand and be a little patient with me because I'm going to run around and I'll get you a mic and we can ask those questions. But again, we just want to thank you so much for being here, being a part of this year's Marine Science Day and allowing us to share our science with you. So thank you very much. How about a big round of applause if you are excited to get and hear about today's talk? Today's speakers are working on some things that we are just really, really excited to share with you all. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of them. Hang on one second, Miguel, before we turn those lights down so I can read my notes. So we have two speakers today. We have Dr. Casey Bierlich, who is a postdoc scholar with the Geospatial Ecology Marine Megafauna, better known as the GEMM lab, led by Lee Torres here at Oregon State University, and their lab is part of the Marine Mammal Institute. If you haven't seen it, they have a room across the way with all of the exhibitors in that space talking about really cool research projects. Casey is also a director of the MMI's new Center of Drone Excellence, or CODEX, which focuses on the development of analytical methods for using drones to monitor the health of marine mammal populations. I think we're going to learn a lot more about that effort today. Codex has developed several innovative hardware and software tools to help researchers using drones collect and analyze important health data on marine mammals. Casey also uses drones as a non-invasive method to study the morphology and health of baleen whales. Our other speaker today is Clara Bird. Clara is a PhD candidate with the GEMM Lab and MMI under the supervision of Lee Torres as well. Her work focuses on studying the behavioral ecology of foraging gray whales off the coast here of Oregon. Her interest is in understanding how their feeding behavior varies across habitats and individual characteristics, including body size, condition, and sex. So I'm going to hand it off to these two, and they're going to show us some cool slides and photos and videos. Yep. You both live?
Yep.
Okay. Sweet.
All right. Cool. Can everybody hear me? Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Cinnamon. Really appreciate it. And thanks everybody putting Marine Science Day on. And thanks everyone for being here. Marine Science Day. Wow. Amazing. It's been pretty incredible. Is this our first time here at Marine Science Day? Raise your hand. Okay. Wow. Good number of people. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah. Super impressed by all the booths. Make sure you spend some time going to and checking out everyone in the different rooms. It's been an awesome experience. We're so excited to be here to talk about the research we've been working on using drones. Who here has seen a whale before? Okay, wow, pretty good amount. Yeah, awesome. So you may have noticed that whales are big, but something we're interested in is how big are they? And that's it seems like a simple question, but that's actually a really important question. You know, the size of an animal can tell you a lot about it. It can tell you how healthy it is, how it functions and thrives in its environment. And so we think about that question a lot, studying these animals, but it's interesting to think about where does that information come from for such a large animal that is really hard to study. I mean, it's not everyone in this room has seen one. Sometimes it's just from a far distance, maybe just a little puff of air. And you can't ask a whale to hold still and take a tape measure and ask it how healthy it is. So we have to think of innovative tools to study them. But information that we do have on their size actually comes a lot of the times from dead whales. And so a lot of them comes from stranding. So when a whale washes ashore dead, that creates an opportunity for us to collect samples, to collect measurements, or even from whaling data. There's a lot of size information that has come from them, from those efforts. But a lot of that is from 30, 50, maybe even 100 years ago. So those measurements might be a little outdated. And so who here has ever flown a drone before? Okay, wow. So drones are pretty cool. They're pretty fun. They can give you some really great imagery. Sometimes they're kind of annoying. I can see that. But we think of them as scientists as a really valuable tool. And so they let us, we can take them into very remote environments. We can take them on small boats like you see here. This is the drone we use in the field. We will launch the drone from by hand. So I will hand it to my field partner. She'll hold it above her head, like you see Lee here in the photo. And then when we'll fly over a whale, collect imagery, and we'll bring it back and land it safely in our field partner's hand, which is what Lisa's doing in the video there. And you try not to think about how expensive the drone is and how it's not, waterproof, and you don't want to crash it or, chop your field partner's hand off. You don't think about any of those things. And so this is a really special presentation for us. Clara and I are really, really good friends. We first met actually on the East Coast at Duke University. I was in grad school. She was in undergrad. And we just really enjoyed working together and had a great opportunities to work a lot in the Antarctic Peninsula, which are the top photos are from down there, and the bottom left photo. So we'll talk a little bit about that work. But really cool that we both ended up here on the West Coast. You can see that photo in the bottom right, the Newport Bridge in the background. And all this time, we've spent a lot of time, using drones, developing methods, and doing a lot of research. So we're really excited to share that with you today. And as Cinnamon mentioned, we just started Codex, the Center of Drone Excellence at the Marine Mammal Institute, where we do focus on analytical methods and developing software and hardware, not only for us, but to share for other researchers. So it's freely available for others to basically, it's hard. There's a lot of process and effort that goes into using drones into studying whales. And so we want to share that information with others. I wanted to quickly share that the Codex is largely funded by the Navy, ONR, as well as you see a license plate up there. You may have seen those driving around. Part of the fee that goes towards these gray whale license plates actually directly comes to MMI, Marine Mammal Institute, and supports marine mammal conservation research. So if anyone in the audience has that on their car, thank you so much. It's made a big difference. Yeah, big contribution. We really appreciate that. And if you're coming up to renew your license and you like whales and you want to put a whale on your tail, maybe consider getting one. Also, I have some other lab logos on here, like the iLab, and we partner with them a lot. And maybe if you haven't been over just around the hall, down the hall, they have some really cool exhibits there. We partner with them and we create a lot of fun technology and hardware to put on the drone. So like this laser altimeter, essentially, we put on the drone, can give us more accurate altitude readings to basically get more accurate measurements. We're moving into this space where we're going to start tagging whales from drones. So we're not going to talk about that much today, but they have some information over there. So definitely check them out, as well as these other labs like the GEMM lab, who Cinnamon mentioned earlier, and these other awesome labs up there. So with that, Clara and I kind of were thinking about this talk and highlight a lot of themes kind of from some of the different work throughout our experiences stood out to us. So we're going to take you on a journey through different places. We're going to start in the icy, cold Western Antarctic Peninsula. We're going to move up to New Zealand, Aotearoa, and we're going to bring it on home to the Oregon coast. And so we're going to first start here in Antarctica. And I really like this photo because this is from the drone's perspective. I'm flying it in the boat there. And this is a typical day in Antarctica. Sometimes it feels like you're in a freezer, and that can be challenging as your hands are cold, you're working in this remote environment, you're flying over whales, hopefully if you can find them. But sometimes the weather's great and it's beautiful. Either way, it's just an amazing opportunity to get down there. But why we were down there was to study these guys. And this was with Duke University with the Marine Robotics and Remote Sensing Lab. Does anybody know what type of whale this is?
If you study whales, don't answer.
Don't answer if you study whales. And just shout it out. We heard a fin whale. Any other guesses? A right whale? Blue whale? Those are really good guesses. Those are really good guesses. This is a really tricky one. I didn't expect you guys to get this one, but it's an Antarctic minke whale. So yeah, it's a challenging one. But these whales they're beautiful. They have really interesting coloration patterns. They're super fun to fly over. They're actually one of the smallest baleen whales. And they're very athletic, doing barrel rolls, swimming around each other. So really, really fun. And so this is a typical view that we have as researchers, or even just when you're on a boat, you might see a whale and it might look like this, right? This might look familiar to people who have seen whales before. And so we saw these whales down from the boat in Antarctica. And who here, raise your hand if you think that this is the same individual whale. Wow, nobody thinks this is the same individual. Okay. What about different individuals? Okay, a lot more people. All right. And then who thinks that these are different species? Okay. All right. Few people. Okay. Now, what if we change our perspective and use the drone imagery of those whales? Now, who thinks these are the same individual? Okay, nobody. Who thinks these are different individuals? Okay. And who thinks that these are different species? Okay. So the drone really helped us figure out that these were different species. And so we were able to look at the photos from the boat view and realize that not only was it we had one Antarctic minke whale, but we also had a dwarf minke whale. And we'll bring it back to the drone image here. And that was really surprising. There's been a few records of dwarf minke whales being along the Antarctic Peninsula, but they're pretty rare. They're usually found in much warmer subtropical water. They eat very different things. So this wasn't even on our radar to see them. And we thought those whales from the boat view were Antarctic minke whales. It wasn't until we got back on board and looked at the drone images, we realized, what are these guys doing here? These are dwarf minke whales. And so this next slide might look a little overwhelming, but the takeaway is that we can use the drone images to look at these really unique coloration patterns to help identify that they are different species, and we can even use them to identify different individuals. And what I wanted to highlight from here is a certain region called the rostral saddle. And it's where these two red arrows are pointing to. And it's this lighter shading that extends on the right side on top of the head, just past the blowhole. And for dwarf minke whales, this is a very distinctive feature that is unique to this whale that they have. But for Antarctic minke whales, they have been described as specifically not having this feature. And almost every single Antarctic minke whale we flew over had this feature. So that was really interesting. They're not supposed to have it, but they do. And we would have never known that without having this drone image. And so, like as I said, there's been very few reports of dwarf minke whales along the Antarctic Peninsula. And so that was really unusual. And so there's a couple explanations we came up with. One, well, maybe they've actually always been there. They've just been historically misidentified as Antarctic minke whales. I mean, we thought they were Antarctic minke whales from the typical traditional historical view of the boat. It wasn't until we changed our perspective to the sky, we realized these are different animals. So maybe that's just been happening throughout time. Or maybe this is due to climate change, a southward range expansion due to regional warming. I mean, like I said, these animals like warmer water, they eat different things. And so maybe the habitat is changing around Antarctica, which it is, that supports different types of animals moving in. And so this highlights how important this new technology is to be able to record this and collect this baseline data. So as we move into the future, we can start to understand how healthy these whales are and what's happening down there, as well as I mentioned, identify these unique features on the Antarctic minke whales.
Oh, that's not good. There we go. So we weren't just there to study minke whales. We also were looking at these whales. Does anyone want to take a guess what this is? Shout it out. There we go. Yes, these are humpback whales, which are found all along the western Antarctic Peninsula. And we love this photo. I mean, A, it's stunning, but B, because it really highlights how if you're in a boat and you know that there's a big animal next to you, but then you look at it from the drone's perspective and you kind of go, oh, that's a big whale. And it totally changes what you thought you were seeing from the surface. And this picture really highlights that. I mean, there's 4 people in that boat. It's a small boat, but it's still, you know, a decent size. But next to that whale, it looks like a toy. And so it's really cool because we can use these photos and also scientific methods to measure these whales without harming them, without really bugging them. I think we're more annoyed than we are by the sound of the drone. And it's really a powerful, non-invasive way to collect beautiful images and also study these whales. Oh yeah, the humpback. And so we can measure them, but we can also look at their behavior, which is a theme that we'll touch on later in this talk as well. But we can look at how they're feeding. And so this is part of a bubble net. Has anyone heard of bubble net feeding? Yeah. And so this is part of it. This is a more complete bubble net. And from the boat, it does look weird. It sort of looks like there's jacuzzi tub jets going underwater. But when you look at it from the drone, you actually see this beautiful geometry revealed of the way that these humpbacks are feeding. And they're essentially corralling, like a herd dog corralling sheep. They're corralling their prey. They eat these krill, these little, basically tiny little shrimp. And they're corralling them with the bubble net. And then what you see here, let's see. Nope, can't see my mouse. Okay, there are 2 whales. They're coming up straight up at the drone's view and their mouths are open. So they're taking a huge gulp of all that prey they just corralled and they're using that net and then they come up from the bottom and they go nom. And that's how they're eating. But we, without the drone, wouldn't be able to study this nearly as well as we can now. But of course, that's not the only way they feed. They also feed at the surface. So eventually you're going to see 4 whales appear. Okay, now we see 3. There's the 4th. Wait for it. No. And so this is incredible, A, because you can observe surface lunge feeding, but you also could see the synchrony, right? You can use the drone footage to clearly see how these whales were doing this at the same time, which is just incredible footage. And to see the expansion of that, their pouch, their ventral grooves, is just a really, again, incredible perspective that we can use to see what these whales are doing. Because, of course, whales are in Antarctica to feed. These humpbacks are there. They migrate around December, and then their #1 job is to eat as much as they can before they leave. And so we often refer to humpbacks as blimps by the end of the season because they get really fat, or ideally that's what they should be when they leave. And so they leave around April or June, they go back to Colombia and Panama. And we use this as a metric of their health. A fat whale is a happy whale, is our favorite saying. And so from the drone, we can actually measure their surface area to quantify how much fat they gained. And if they leave good and fat, then that tells us that they were able to feed successfully. But if at the end of a different season, maybe they hadn't gained as much, that might be a reason for concern. That might tell us that they weren't able to get as much food as they should have. But we don't just get to study these individual whales, we also can look at calves. And so here we have a mom and its calf. And so we can study mothers, right, are spending a lot of energy, not just on their own survival, but on feeding their calf and surviving. And so it's especially important to look at how moms are doing. And we can also make sure that the little calves are getting fat and happy too. So drones help us monitor body condition and health of whales in a way that we haven't really been able to do before.
All right. So now we're going to take it to a little bit of a warmer place. We're going to move up to New Zealand, Aotearoa. Now, does anybody know what type of whale this is? Shout it out, shout it out. Blue whale, nice. It's kind of a trick question. I give the mean ones, I guess. It's technically a pygmy blue whale, but I'll give it to you, I'll give it to you. Does anybody know how big blue whales are? Big, yes, very big. Shout out a number, any numbers? Yeah, I heard 100 feet in there. I heard maybe 2.5, 2 school buses. So yeah, the common number is 100 feet blue whales. They're the largest animal to have ever lived. Bigger than dinosaurs. That's right, bigger than dinosaurs. And then you get the pygmy blue whales, who are short blue whales, but they're still like 72 feet long. I mean, that's huge. So
whale just past 4 or 5 months up off Depot Bay, Lincoln City.
oh wow.
Now I don't know if it was the big deer.
The pygmies are mostly around in the southern hemisphere, around New Zealand. So it's probably a regular eastern North Pacific blue whale. Oh, amazing! So cool. Yeah, it's pretty special to see such large animals. So this project in New Zealand is part of the GEMM lab that Cinnamon mentioned. That's led by Lee Torres over here. We call it the Sapphire Project, which stands for Synthesis of Acoustics, Physiology, Prey, and Habitat in a Rapidly Changing Environment. What that means is we're really interested in how climate change is affecting krill, which is what the blue whales eat, and how the krill impact blue whales and their health, and if they're able to reproduce and have calves. It's an amazing project with an amazing team. You can learn more about it by stopping over at the GEMM Lab booth in room 176. And so as part of the Sapphire Project, we wanted to compare this New Zealand pygmy blue whale population to other blue whale populations in the Pacific, like the Eastern North Pacific blue whale population and the Chilean blue whales. And what's we call the ENP as the Eastern North Pacific. And those whales and the Chilean whales migrate similar to what Clara was talking about with the humpback whales. They have separate foraging and wintering grounds. But what's interesting about the pygmy blue whales in New Zealand is that they're actually there all year round, which is pretty unusual for such a large whale. So we wanted to compare these different populations. And we mentioned that with Codex, this new drone lab that we've started here at MMI, we've developed a lot of software and hardware. Well, we actually developed our own photogrammetry software, which is basically making measurements from photos. And so this is our photogrammetry software we call Morphometrics. You can import a drone image and make all sorts of measurements. In this case, we wanted to measure the whale's length, its body condition, which we measure as body area index, which is this shaded region of the body where whales are known to store a lot of their fat. Body area index, or BAI, is similar to body mass index in humans, BMI. So think of it as a standardized number to be able to compare across individuals. So it's really, really useful to compare individuals and populations. We could also measure the head length and the fluke span and compare the different populations. And what we found is the pygmy whales are not so pygmy. So we've got the ENP, or the Eastern North Pacific blue whales on the left, and then the Chilean ones in the middle, and then the New Zealand ones on the right. And what we found is that they all actually have similar sizes, body lengths, actually more similar to the pygmies, where they're around 72 feet. And that was totally surprising. We were expecting the ENPs and the Chileans to be much larger, more like that 100 feet that we've all heard about. And then additionally, the New Zealand pygmies were in better body condition, so they had a higher BAI number. They had larger flukes, and they had larger heads. So totally blew our mind. It was not what we were expecting. And so what does this mean? Size information, particularly for blue whales, is often too generalized and outdated. And I think this goes back to the theme that we brought up in the beginning is, where does the size information come from? And it might be really outdated, or maybe it's not applicable to all populations. And so I think this really highlights the utility of using drones as a tool to be able to get more specific details on these different populations and learn about them and understand, how they thrive and how they are healthy. All right, so now we're going to bring it on home, bring it along the Oregon coast. All right, so what type of whale is this? Nice, yes. No trick questions this time. All right, I'm being nicer. Yes, this is a gray whale. How many people have seen a gray whale on the Oregon coast? Yes, awesome. They're so incredible. You come here in the summer, you can stand on the cliffs and you can look down and see them right there swimming through the kelp. It's incredible. They get really close to shore, and they're such a large animal too. So if you haven't seen one, definitely try to head here in the summer and and bring your binoculars, or you might not even need them actually. So when we think about gray whales, a typical gray whale spends their winters in Baja California, Mexico, and they'll migrate up along the coast and make their way up to Alaska or the Arctic. And we call this normal or typical gray whale the Eastern North Pacific, or ENP gray whale. And they have a population size of around 14,500. And there's this other weird whale that instead doesn't go all the way up. It migrates to between Northern California and British Columbia, Canada, including the Oregon coast. And they spend their summers here. And those, we call them the Pacific Coast Feeding Group, or PCFG whale. And they have a much smaller population size of around 212. And as part of the GEMM lab, again, led by Lee Torres, we have this project where we study this PCFG whale population that comes along the Oregon coast. And we call this the GRANITE project. Scientists love acronyms. This stands for Gray Whale Response to Ambient Noise Informed by Technology and Ecology. And this is an incredible project with an amazing team. There's so many different parts to it. We do photo ID, and so we can actually identify individuals by their scars and unique markings. And that's very helpful because we'll see the same individuals return each year. We see them throughout the summer. That can help us estimate their age. So we know a lot about them, and we can see them each year. We also do prey sampling. We also do fecal collection, which is a very scientific way of saying we collect poop. And we're very happy about it. You can see Lisa smiling. I mean, that's a pooper scooper in her hand right there, and we are stoked. And the poop tells us so much information. I mean, we can look at DNA, we can look at the sex of the whale, we can look at hormones to see if the whale is pregnant, to see how stressed the whale is. So really important to link with all these other components. We obviously do drone stuff. We put hydrophones in the water to look at the underwater acoustic environment. And then we do some tagging that I talked about that we're going to be doing from drones soon too. But as you guessed it, today, we're just going to talk about the drone aspect of it. But if you'd like to learn more about the project, definitely stop by the GEMM Lab booth again in room 176. So we often work just off the coast here. You maybe have even seen our little orange research boat that we call Ruby. And we'll fly the drone over a whale, and there's Clara. She's flying the drone. That's Clara having a good old time. This is Pac-Man. So as I said, we can identify these unique these whales as each individual, and we know that she's 9 years old. And then from the drone images, we can actually measure them and see how fat she is, see how healthy she is. A fat whale is a happy and healthy whale. And so we've been doing this work since 2016. So we're about to head into our 9th field season, which is pretty incredible. And what's important with this is this time period actually overlaps with, maybe some of you guys have heard of the unusual mortality event that has taken place between 2019 and 2023. What that means is basically a very large number of whales have washed up ashore along the West Coast. In total, it's been 690 dead whales on the coast, which is kind of insane. That's a really large number. It's definitely hurt the population a little bit. But really excited to hear that the UME, or unusually mortality event, is officially ended. So that's really good. But thinking about these different whale groups like ENP and PCFG, we wanted to see if they were both affected similarly from the UME. So we use morphometrics again, that software that we developed through the drone center here, Codex. And we wanted to measure the body condition between these two different groups. And so we looked at the time periods between 2017 and 2019, so leading up to this unusual mortality event. We looked at the body condition of ENP and PCFG whales, and we found that ENP whales' body condition dramatically declined and were a lot skinnier. And at the same time, PCFG whales actually increased body condition. And so this made us conclude that it seemed like the ENP gray whales are more impacted by the UME, which is a surprising finding, and hints that these two different foraging grounds might be affected differently from climate change or different prey availability. And so that was a really useful information. But wait, there's a twist. PCFG are overall skinnier, though, than ENP whales. So even though the UME affected ENPs more, PCFG are just in general more skinnier. And that was a really surprising finding. and leads to all sorts of other questions. Is this a concern? Are they not getting enough nutrients, or are they adapted to be skinnier? And so we wanted to get some more body condition or body size measurements of these whales to understand this. And so we used morphometrics again and looked at their body length. We looked at their head length, or the snout to blowhole measurement we have up there, and looked at their fluke span, so very similar to the blue whales we just did. And we found that PCFG whales reach shorter adult lengths and have smaller heads and flukes than ENPs. The females are about a meter shorter, or 3 feet shorter than a female ENP whale. And the males are about a half a meter, or 1.5 feet shorter, which is a big difference. And so what that means is PCFG are skinnier, shorter, and have smaller heads and flukes than the ENP typical gray whale. So we have a really unique group of gray whales that come here off the Oregon coast, which is pretty incredible. And I don't know, something that makes me very proud and very excited to study these whales. And so, a question is, why are PCFG smaller and skinnier than ENP? And we have 2 hypotheses for this. One of them is more of a negative perspective of, well, perhaps changing habitat is resulting in not enough food for them to gain sufficient energy to put towards growth. So they're not getting enough food. Their habitat has changed drastically, and so that's resulting in them in not being able to grow and being skinnier and being smaller. Or perhaps this smaller size and this skinnier body size helps them thrive in this unique habitat. And if you think about the Oregon coast, it's a lot different than the Arctic, right? I mean, like we just said, we've seen gray whales on really close to shore here, swimming through the kelp forest. I mean, this whale is literally playing, peekaboo through the kelp, which is pretty remarkable. They swim really close to reefs, and the waves might be crashing against the rocks, but they're able to just stay perfectly in the same position. You might see them off South Beach with coming up to the surface with a mouthful of mud. And so they have these really unique behaviors that they do in this unique habitat that Clara is about to talk about.
Okay, fun movie time. Okay, so we've identified 8 different feeding behaviors from the drone, which is that we've been watching them feed for 8 years. We're about to go into our 9th. And from the video, they're feeding in water so shallow that we can actually see how they're feeding from the perspective of the drone, which is pretty remarkable. And before we had the drones, we maybe thought that they had, let's say, like 3 different ways of feeding. And then we watched all the footage, or I watched all the footage, and saw, oh, there's actually a lot more going on. So let's check it out. So our first behavior is called head standing. It's pretty self-explanatory. The whale is doing a headstand. So here in the video, we have 2 whales, and you can see that whale on the right is mid-headstand. The whale on the left is just coming into a headstand. And so they have their head, their mouth right above the reef or above the bottom. And then their fluke is at the surface or breaking the surface, as you can see. So if you've ever seen a whale tail sticking out of the water off the Oregon coast, but the whale's not really shifting, it's that tail is staying in place, that whale's probably doing a headstand. And if the tail is sticking out of the water, that means the whale is in water shallower than it is long, which is just kind of crazy. And so these whales they're sculling their pectoral fins to stay in place as they're suctioning the prey. And so if you ever watched synchronized swimming, that's always what I think of when I watch this footage. And so it's just remarkable that these big whales in shallow water are able to maneuver themselves into a headstand. If you've ever done a headstand in a pool, it's not hard, it's pretty hard to stay in that position for a long time. They also have another stationary behavior called side swim stationary, which here we can see a whale named Tulip going into a side swim. This is off of Port Orford, so a bit further south than Newport. Right now, it just did what we call a bubble blast. So it exhaled a big bubble of air, and now it's going to start side swimming. So you can see its pectoral fin, so the fin on its side sticking through the water, again, sculling, synchronized swimmer. And we think that those bubble blasts are actually to help them with buoyancy. So again, if you've ever tried to dive down or stay underwater, you sort of start to float back up to the surface, right? Because your lungs are full of air. And so whales like us, we think, are exhaling to get air out of their lungs so they can stay sunken a little bit because they're in water that is so, so shallow. They also do this behavior that we just call subsurface stationary, because the whale, it's not on its side, it's not on its head, it's sort of in normal whale position, but it's feeding. So you'll see, it's bent in a crazy shape, and also it's sort of staying in place, suctioning down again the food. They move forward sometimes. So this is side swimming forward. Whoop, there we go. So you just might have seen that jaw snap. So I always think, there we go, of like a Pac-Man going nom, 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 nom through the water. And it is interesting. We have preliminary evidence that whales they are sided. So some whales are always going to roll onto their right versus there are a few lefties, which as a left-handed person makes me really happy. They also do this upside down. Come on, there we go. And so just like side swimming, there we go. So it's rolling and now it's belly up and it's doing that same jaw snapping motion. But again, it just did like a big S curve. And again, so it's feeding upside down and there's the kelp. So it's really not a lot of water. They also do surface feeding. And so this is just off of South Beach. That was a bubble blast again. And these whales are actually feeding on big porcelain crab larvae aggregations. It's the only time that we see this behavior. And they're feeding just under the surface. And so as you see jaw snaps, you might have seen a little bit of their baleen when it opened its mouth. And they'll do this for all day as long as that big patch of food is there. And it's just crazy to me that they're barely at the surface, but they're not breaking the surface. They're managing to stay, 1 to 2 feet right there. So the big question is, my question, is why do different whales use these different behaviors? Does every whale use every behavior, or are there patterns within this? We have 8 years of data of whales that we see many times throughout a year, across years, and we can link this to their size, to their age, to their sex, and try to understand if different whales do different things. Spoiler alert, they do. So I found that those forward swimming behaviors, side swimming, upside down swimming, are performed by shorter whales in shallow water, and headstanding is performed by longer whales in deeper water. So it looks like as an animal grows, it switches into headstanding, which we've seen some younger whales try to headstand, and it doesn't look that great. They're look like a toddler learning how to, do a headstand. And so we think that this is related to being stronger, to watching other whales do it. So they're learning, they're practicing, physically gaining the ability to do so. But this switch is really remarkable because everyone's thought that all whales just do all the things. And this does show that whales have the ability to switch, but this pattern is really interesting and has interesting consequences given that small whales are younger whales and as they age, so different age groups might be affected differently if something changes in this habitat. But there's this switch. So we've just taken you on a big worldwide tour of our career, which is pretty crazy. And so to briefly sum up, we looked at minke whales on the Western Arctic Peninsula and saw how their coloration patterns could be observed from the drone. And we actually identified that there were 2 different species there that we wouldn't have been able to do without drones. We watched that humpbacks can turn into really big blimps throughout a season and watched how they feed. We discovered that pygmy blue whales are not so pygmy and that we need to reassess how we summarize whale sizes in, say, encyclopedias and information books. And then we learned a lot about how incredible the whales that we have right here in our backyard are, that they're shorter, they're skinnier, they're weird yoga whales that feed in incredible ways. And we have them right here. They're part of the Oregon coast. And so hopefully you guys get the chance to see them over the summer and just know how special these whales are. So we need to give a big thank you to Cinnamon and the Marine Science Day for inviting us. We've loved putting this talk together and sharing our work with you. Again, a huge thank you to everyone who has a license plate for that funding, the Marine Mammal Institute, the GEMM Lab, our home institute, the iLab for collaboration, and then all of our other funders and collaborators. We wouldn't be able to do this without any of that collaboration. And now we'll take questions.
It's amazing to me that this is crowdsourced research. All of you help pay for this, so that's pretty amazing. So we're going to open it up to questions. We're going to kind of bounce back and forth between questions online and questions in the room. There's a lot of us in here today, so I'm going to take one side and then the other. And if you have follow-up questions, you can always go find these two researchers in at their booth. But we're going to go back and forth. So Roseanne, you have the first question.
Have you ever crashed a drone in the ocean?
Great question. We have not. Everybody knock on wood. Yeah. It will probably happen one day, but we're staying strong.
All right, questions in the room.
That high mortality event that took place, was that mostly with the gray whales or were others involved too?
Yeah, a UME or unusual mortality event will be declared for a single species, and for this case it was just for the gray whales, but there have been other UME events for other species.
Okay, question in the room.
Hello, I really enjoyed your presentation, so thank you. My question is about the drones specifically. I feel like as a concept, drones are fairly common now. So what inspired the drone research for this? And is that becoming a standardized practice across all marine research?
Yeah, great question. That's something that we've put a lot of thought into as well. And that's why we're so excited to launch Codex, or that Center of Drone Excellence. Is part of it is to standardize it, because that's a really important point. There's so many different drones, different types. It's constantly evolving. And so you get different levels of accuracy associated with different drones. And we want to make sure that, results are comparable as we move forward in time. And so a lot of the work we do focus on that exact point, and, having the software to measure the whale, having ways of dealing with uncertainty associated with the specific drone you're using. So then when you produce a measurement, it will be comparable to another drone or a measurement that came from a different drone. So we're really excited to launch Codex for that exact question. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say when drones sort of became smaller and cheaper, once that commercial market really expanded, a lot of researchers, Lee bought a drone in her when she started the lab. And yeah, I think that's when we were just starting our careers. So that was just growing, and clearly for whale scientists, a really cool tool once we knew we could launch them off a boat safely. So yeah, it's just everyone's been sort of expanding, and now we're trying to slow down and standardize how we do it.
Perfect. Question online.
Do the whales ever become defensive when you're around?
That's a good question. We definitely have, when we're driving in the boat, very careful sort of knowledge and training of how to drive around a whale. You don't want to come at it head on. They don't like that. And we keep a safe distance, and we have a lot of practices to not bother them. I think that is a huge benefit of using drones, is that we can stay further away with the boat, which is what's really loud and has a stronger presence than the drone. Research shows that, especially at the altitudes that we're flying at, the whale is not really bothered by the drone's presence at all.
Yeah, and I'll just add too, that's kind of a lot of the motivation for, as I mentioned, we're going to start tagging whales with drones, because a lot of times to be able to tag a whale, you have to approach it really closely with the boat, and that can sometimes spook the whale or disturb the whale. And so we can stay really far, as Clara mentioned, and drop a tag. A non-invasive tag is just sticks on the whale through suction cups, which is pretty amazing. But that's another reason so we don't disturb the whales. That's kind of where that idea and thought came from as well.
Clara, can you talk to us real quickly about how you all can approach with research boats? It's different than with a public boat.
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, we have many permits in order to spend as much time as close to the whales. And also we weren't experienced boat drivers, but we've been trained by our advisors and the people in charge who've been trained by other people. And so we're really careful. We keep track of how long we've been around the whale. We turn the engine off as often as we can. We take as many measures as we can to sort of minimize what our presence might be, how our presence might be affecting the whales. Yeah, and so we are highly aware of our time and how we're approaching them. And everyone who is learning how to drive around a whale is trained by people. It's like a very specific kind of boat driving, I would say. And so you approach learning how to do that like you approach learning how to fly a drone or any sort of technical skill.
And a lot of that process also goes for flying drones as well. We have to, as Clara said, there's a lot of permits involved, and you have to get special training, and you have to actually have permits to fly over whales. And sometimes along the Oregon coast, we've seen drones coming randomly from shore, which is technically not allowed, and can be frustrating too, because that can inhibit our work from trying to collect the research and when we do have the permit. So that's something to also think about as well.
Okay, question in the room.
How far above the ocean surface were the drones for the photography? And was the water clearer down in Antarctica than further north, where you have a lot of shipping and pollution of the Pacific Ocean?
Yeah, that's a cool question. You probably noticed like a lot of the watercolor was very different in a lot of the images. And that actually changes quite a bit. In Antarctica, sometimes it was just bright blue, crystal clear. You could see really deep. Other days it was very green and dark and murky. And so it actually changes quite a bit. And I'd say that's the case for off the Oregon coast as well, in Antarctica and in New Zealand. It just kind of depends on the cloud cover, the sun, and the productivity of the water. A lot of times you'll get different, currents coming in, bringing all sorts of productivity. And that seems to impact more of the water clarity, at least in the areas that we're working. But thinking about areas and how shipping and more, industrialized areas is something we are thinking about. And I think that goes to comparing these different gray whale populations, the PCFG whales off Oregon, they're staying in a lot more heavily populated areas compared to the gray whales that migrate all the way up to the Arctic. So we are thinking about those questions, but just kind of in a different way.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like 30 to 40 meters.
Can you repeat that question?
Sorry, the question is how high we're usually flying the drone, and it's usually around 30 to 40 meters.
All right, a question online. Go ahead, Roseanne.
How can someone who has a commercial drone license get involved in flying drones with the lab or help the marine community?
That's a tricky one.
That's a great question. And that's something so basically, if you have a drone pilot license and you have a lot of experience flying drones and you're interested in helping this work or helping out with this sort of work, I think partnering with a research team is the first place to start, because as I said, you need those permits to fly over them. Marine mammals are protected federally, and so to be able to, you do need that permit to be able to fly over them. But yeah, I think that skill set is really valuable, as we've highlighted, and a lot of more labs are adopting drones in their labs, and we need drone pilots. And so I think partnering with the research lab, if you can contact Codex. Our website is up on the Marine Mammal Institute, the Center of Drone Excellence.
Yeah.
That'd be a good place to start. You can get in contact with me. I'd be happy to chat more.
Yeah, or just see, depending on where you live, if there's any research groups in your area that would be interested in working with the pilot. But I think that's key, is you should work with the scientists and not just try to collect data by yourself.
All right, couple more questions here. Questions in the room.
When was the last time you've been out there with the whales?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
When was the last time you were out there with the whales?
So we were last out here off the coast in October, and we're just getting ready to go out. We'll start again in late May.
And then Lee and I were down in New Zealand in January and February, collecting some of that pygmy blue whale footage that you saw today. But we're excited to get back out there this summer and see the gray whales.
Great question online.
Are some species of whale more interactive or friendly than others when you're out there?
Huh.
I would say yes. Also, it depends on where you are. So, like we talked about, a lot of whales that migrate have wintering grounds and then summer or foraging grounds. And so a big example, especially word friendly, might be if you've heard about the gray whales when they're in their lagoons in Mexico, Baja. So right, that's where people pet whales and they kiss whales, and the whales come right up to the boat, and it is remarkable, and we don't really see that behavior here. So it's interesting to think about different species also are different the way they might interact with boats. So yeah, I think it's different species and also sort of what their priorities are depending on where they are and what time of year it is.
Great. So I know there's more questions, but I'm going to give these two just a chance to talk a little bit about the future of your work and what you think is next.
That's a big question. I think more work integrating all these data streams. So we're this sort of a lot of the granite work or the gray whale work, right? We're combining information on, we can use photo ID, the drone data to link behavior and the size and the shape of the whales. We can link it with the hormones from the poop, I think, and the tagging data. So I think a lot more, the future is drones just being integrated into a lot of projects to sort of bring these data streams together and answer a lot of these questions that we're seeing we can answer if we combine all the different ways of collecting data.
And how about you, Casey? Future?
For me specifically or for the?
What do you think for Casey specifically, but also for the future of the work and the drone with marine mammals?
Yeah, I think Clara nailed it. It's really exciting to see how this technology is starting to be adopted by a lot of different labs and researchers around the world. When we first started, there was not that many people who had drones, and so a lot of this was figuring it out on our own. And so one question hinted is, creating tools and standardizing the methods. I think to now that more people are using them, to standardize that so we can all work together more collaboratively and ask bigger questions, like the blue whale comparison question is a really good example. Working with other teams who collected some of that data shows the power of how, with that synergy that we can create with this. And I think this is a great tool to do that. And then the field is, evolving as well. It's changing very quickly. And so I'm excited to dive into the tagging component that we're going to start doing with drones. We might start putting thermal cameras on drones too, see the thermal scape and how what we can learn from that. So I think it's a really exciting time, and hopefully we'll be back again soon giving more updates on that sort of information.
Great. Can we give our two speakers a round of applause? All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our keynote. I hope you go out and take a look at all of the different exhibitors. And if you have questions for our speakers, they can stick around for a few minutes.
And
come take a look at the drone.
Yeah, you can come look at the drone.
This kind of a standard just commercial drone that people can buy at the pump was, or is this? It is.
Yeah, this is just the Inspired 2. Sorry. Yeah.